Okay, hello. Who is on Twitch today? I think Allison. Just one of you get on Twitch, please. Let me know if the stream is working. This is my first time streaming from this laptop, so we just got all sorts of things going on today. But hopefully that's working. Just let me know. I'm gonna stall for a couple minutes until it's up. But yeah, cool. Thank you all again for your patience. I really appreciate it. Today is going to be hopefully a pretty interesting lecture. We're going to be revisiting prototyping. So we talked about it a couple of weeks ago during week 5, but we didn't really have to do a lot of practice with it because we had the midterm immediately after. So with this advanced prototyping lecture, we're both going to review what we talked about and then dive more into what exactly you're able to do with it, specifically with Smart Animate, and kind of learning good practices for doing that sort of thing. Is it running? It's running, it's work? Okay, awesome, cool. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. So again, we're starting with a recap of prototyping, going into Smart Animate, talking more about advanced actions, and then learning why it is really, really important to always rename your layers, because there are reasons that come into prototyping about this, and then we'll do wrap up. The attendance form, because Yelkey is just like not working for me right now, is this instead. So it's tinyurl.com/YVUZB6D5. Hopefully that is not too hard. If the Twitch mod could send it in the chat, that would be super helpful. And again, this is for enrolled students only. Because it's a tiny URL, it should work after class. It should just be persistent. So if you're accessing this after watching this live, this link should still work for you, but we'll still also send it in the Slack as well. Yeah, tinyurl.com/YVUZB6D5. Okay, so we'll recap first of prototyping, what it is used for. So we talked previously about this slide. Prototyping is basically the idea of turning these design concepts into something that actually has that layer of interaction that brings it one step closer to being the like quote unquote actual app, the actual website, the actual whatever it is that you're creating. And by doing these interactions and adding these connections, you're able to better kind of ground your app in what it's going to look like for a user and learn more about how people think around your particular designs. So learning more insights about how people use something by doing things like testing, by doing things like research. So in the context of Figma and other prototyping tools, it lets you demonstrate how things behave, how things connect to each other, and how things are going to like actually work once they're built. So the idea of prototyping hinges around this idea of forming connections between objects within frames, across frames, basically just making them all linked together. So you define what happens if I tap or hover or wait or drag or anything like that, and how I get from point A to point B. You can have multiple connections on a single object. So if I were just gonna hover on A, it'll do one thing. If I were to click on A, it's gonna do another thing. If I hover on D, it can also go to the same thing as something before. It's very flexible, and you're basically able to do whatever you want as long as you're separated by different triggers. So the main idea that you have to keep in mind is that clicking on one thing always has to do one thing. Like you can't click on something and it's gonna have two branching options randomly. It has to always have one trigger, can lead to one interaction. So this idea of triggers, actions, and animations, again, is this 3-part breakdown of what exactly a prototype is. So every interaction you can think of as 3 distinct parts. You have to think about all 3 items anytime that you're going to prototype something. First is the trigger. That's the user action. That's what's going to be done to the design to start something. So the trigger can be something like clicking, dragging, hovering, pressing something on your keyboard. There's also these ideas of mouse movement versus clicking and dragging and hovering. This is something that you might need to think about depending on what the case is. You will see that there's something called while hovering, but there's also mouse enter. There's different cases you might need to use different things. It's a little bit difficult to understand exactly what case is useful, but you can read more about how this connects to actual code to think about in what circumstances you would need to use different cases. So that's the trigger. That's what the user is doing. Next are the actions. The actions are what happen in the interface. So it's what the interface is going to be trying to do, basically what the point B is in this case. They decide what's going to happen, whether you're going to navigate to another screen, if you're going to open an overlay, if you're going to scroll somewhere in the page, like if you ever see on, like example, like a help center document. If you say you click on a certain part of the page, it scrolls you all the way down to the middle. Then swapping overlays, closing overlays, or even just opening a link, you can have something prototyped to open up your browser. And finally, that third part of animations is how the action happens. So it's visually, it's that like slide transition you see in Google Slides. It's what is going to happen visually to get you from point A to point B. So the animations are things like instant, dissolving, smart animate, which we'll be covering a lot of. And we'll be talking a little bit more about these easing curves and kind of doing a little bit more of ad hoc demoing to show you how these differ. So Figma does a really good job generally of showing you all of these different interactions within the modal that you see. A lot of the time, I'm not going to be able to always articulate all 8 of these like with my eyes closed. So Figma gives you this little modal that shows a little animation of what it's going to look like. The nice thing of this actually also changes when you change things like the timing. So if you changed it from 300 milliseconds to 3,000 milliseconds, it'll actually slow down the animation for you as well. So you can get a sense of what it's going to look like once you actually apply it without having to jump straight into prototyping mode. So any questions about any of the basic prototyping information so far? I know that y'all had a lab around it, so hopefully it's okay. But yeah, anything before we get into this? Cool. Also something to note, literally this morning, a huge batch of updates came out about Figma prototyping. I did not have time to make you new content, but we'll be talking through those if we have time. Just basically fingers crossed that we don't get cut off at 8:15 again. But as long as we have time, I'll be showing you something called interactive components, which basically will speed up your workflow like 2,000 times. So definitely look into it. We're never going to require you to do it for this course because it came out today and we didn't have time to teach it. But it is something that we really highly recommend you look into. But yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So smart animate, we talked about before. Do you all recognize the word smart animate at all? Getting some basic head nod a little bit. Okay, totally fine. So basically, this is Figma trying to be guessing what you want to be doing in between frames. So a lot of the time, you're going to have the default of an instant animation, meaning it's just going to automatically, like a light switch, become the next frame. You're going to have dissolving, which is going to kind of fade it in by doing like a transparency change. But smart animate gets kind of clever with it. It thinks about, oh, if you were actually going to animate this, if you're actually going to code this, what do you want it to do? When you swipe something, do you want it to just appear where it's swiped, or do you want it to actually move across the screen? So smart animate is capturing all of those basic ideas that you want to capture and actually putting it into your prototypes. So what smart animate does and how it works is it looks for matching layer names, matching layers that exist across multiple frames. So in this case, it might be something like you might have like one card that's called like card 2. You need them all to be named card 2 across the different frames in order for them to behave how Figma thinks that they will behave. So if you have layers that match in names, Figma recognizes that something has changed about it, specifically things like placement, hue, size, and it applies the transition to animate those changes really smoothly. So in this case, you see this GIF where they are bookmarking and then clicking confirm. So in this case, Figma has really nicely done this action of fading it from an image to gray here, and then when you confirm, it disappears nicely. So it's changing the size really easily. But the specific fading motion of the image becoming gray is really smooth. It's not just doing like an immediate change, and it's being smart about it, basically. So you can select Smart Animate from the list of different animations when you're making a prototype connection, and you can apply it also to make just really seamless animations in general. So stuff like this you could make with Smart Animate. Specifically, you see these different, this motion of like really just smoothness overall. A lot of the time you're gonna kind of end up maybe like defaulting to Smart Animate on different things where it's just gonna be able to detect what it is that you want. But yeah, I think these are all, I think, screen recordings of different examples of Smart Animate used in Figma. Yeah, so this is like an animation that you could create with Smart Animate. So like idea of loading sequences is like one of my favorites. We'll do an ad hoc demo of how to make a really quick loading circle icon. I was really losing my mind when I saw somebody make it. It's just like very easy things that you can start to visualize and put to paper. But yeah, you can make this in Smart Animate. Oh, there's more examples. But yeah, like this kind of thing, this like nice little loading animation of these pulses is something that you would make basically with 4 circles. You would just need 4 frames where one of the circles is bigger in each frame. And then it's gonna smartly make them increase in size, decrease in size, increase in size, decrease in size. For this case, you have this nice drop down where you can have it kind of move upward if you need it to kind of go up, because it can tell that like the named like section of layers has been minimized or kind of shifted upwards. Yeah, any questions about Smart Animate before we do like a demo later about how to kind of do it? Awesome, any questions in chat? Okay, cool. So animation properties, this is kind of diving into not just the idea of UI UX animation, but more animation in general. So keyframes in animation are drawings that define the starting and ending points of any kind of smooth transition. So they define what action of the frame is at a certain point in time. So if you've ever done anything kind of like animation-related sketching exercises, you can take this idea of somebody walking. The keyframes would be these really important points where somebody is like stepping to the ground, they're low, their leg moves, their leg goes back up, and they reach contact with the ground again. And then it's gonna cycle through all these. It's gonna go through here, then go back to low, go back to low, go back to low. Obviously, in an actual animation, when it is 24 frames per second, so there's 24 illustrations or drawings every single second in any standard animation for the most part, you're not gonna, this is not all of them. This is not actually all happening in a fraction of a second. These are just the key frames. These are the most important moments. And you can actually apply this idea of grabbing the most important moments to Figma Smart Animate as well. So here's another idea of how you see all of the actual frames that are involved and then what the keyframes are in comparison. So in this case, the keyframes would be something like the top, this very bottom, so knowing that it's gonna go from normal to flat, to normal again, to flat, to normal again, to flat. Those are the keyframes, and everything in between are literally called in-betweens, all of those middle frames that actually give you the illusion of motion and of movement. So animation can be very complex to simulate lifelike movement like this ball. You have all of these different drawings of these circles just to illustrate a ball bouncing, and you see that how whenever it's moving, it's not just a static circle the whole time. There's this element of like squash and stretch is what it's called. This is the idea that when something is hitting the ground or making contact with the surface, it squashes. You know, if I threw a ball down on the ground, it would kind of flatten out a little bit. And then when it bounces back up, it stretches back out as it has that upward trajectory. So the idea of squash and stretch you're going to see a lot is what makes things look lifelike in animation, or it's what makes things feel believable when you're watching an animated kind of video. Yeah, and then also this idea of how there's different gaps and distances between all of these different frames. Like you see when something is, we learned this in physics class, when something reaches the top of a arch or trajectory, it slows down for a moment, like the velocity is 0 or whatever. And then as it goes down, it gains speed. As it comes back up, it would lose speed, hit 0 again. As it goes back down, it would gain speed. So in the same sense, you have these frames that have longer gaps whenever it's going faster, and then shorter gaps whenever it's going slowly. Longer gaps when it goes down, shorter gaps as it hits the top, longer gaps as it goes down again. So this non-uniform speed, this non-uniform trajectory is the same idea basically as easing curves, which we've discussed before. And the reason why something that has a not parabolic, but has like a swoop shape is gonna feel more normal than something that goes in like a straight vertical line, because nothing in real life really moves at a linear pace. If I'm walking across the room, which I can't do, so get off screen, I'm not actually moving at like a consistent speed this way. That would be really weird. I step, I kind of go up and down with each step. There's this sense of natural or organic movement. So with animation and with smart animation specifically, you really want to focus on the idea of keyframes, identifying what the most important moments are, every kind of picture that you want to see really clearly, and also this idea of this trajectory that you have in between, the speed at which the animation moves. So think of animation as the evolution of a state over time. Seeing how an object transforms via scaling, rotation, color, helps us understand what keyframes we need to create for any animation that we want to portray. So if you were to say, have this on-off switch, I think it's not actually interactive right now. Yeah. You would identify the keyframes in the on-off switch as the on state and the off state. So in the on state, for example, it would be blue, it would be to the right. And on the off state, it would be likely gray or some disabled color, and then to the left. Those are the two keyframes that you need in that situation. And then you can think of how do you want it to look as it's moving? Do you want it to be super fast? Do you want it to be really slow? Do you want it to feel like you're kind of pulling on it almost? Do you want it to be a drag movement? Do you want it to be a click movement? What do you kind of want it to look like in between those keyframes? Yeah, so the specific elements that Figma has control over in Smart Animate are what we mentioned here: scale, position, opacity, rotation, fill. We're going to talk through all of these and kind of understand what options you have when you're smart animating something. Something I want to call out specifically is things like text are not really going to be super fancy. For the most part, text is still going to fade or dissolve. It can't like mesh your text to be different. But these are the things that you do have control over. So scale. If an object changes sizes in between frames, Figma will animate it shrinking or growing. So you see here, it'll shrink, grow nicely. These are all smart animated, by the way. It just grows nicely and shrinks nicely, very smoothly. It's adding all the in-betweens based on the keyframes that you're feeding it. So the idea of keyframes, you have one here, one here. Figma is doing all of the manual work in between to figure out, obviously you don't want it to just jump from here to here. Given the amount of time you've told it to make this animation, it's going to nicely just make it go from small to big to small. So scaling, size, that is good for Smart Animate. Position, specifically just kind of the X, Y coordinates of an object in any given location, are also going to be accessible during Smart Animate. So in this case, it's literally just moving the slider from the top to the bottom, also based on the keyframes that you feed it. In this case, it's actually also prototyped from bottom to top again. Just keep that in mind. It'll be able to animate the object moving from its current XY position to its following XY positions in the case of the same frame. Opacity, also pretty interesting here, where the fill basically of an object, not just the color, but also the opacity can be changed. So you can do this really nicely to make something like appear or disappear in between frames. This is pretty interesting for a lot of different interactions. Whenever you see something fade on screen, and it also kind of moves as it fades, I can show you a pretty specific case where that might happen. So for example, one case that you might see where something both fades and moves, so you really want that smart animate, is when I do this visual bell shows up, it's gonna fade and kind of lower. So it brings up, and then it fades and lowers as it goes away. So that's a case where that opacity part might be something that I want a lot of control over instead of just doing a dissolve. Now rotation, this is actually really clever and pretty cool. Whenever you rotate an object, the angle is actually still recorded in the very top right section, along with the X and the Y coordinates. So even something like a square, where when you rotate it 90 degrees, it looks the same, it's recording that 90-degree rotation, or that 180-degree rotation, or the 270-degree rotation, and it'll be able to do that within Smart Animate. So in this case, I think every object has been rotated some amount, and it's able to reorient them all going to the same location, but still rotated in a way. And finally, fill. So this is something that basically changes the object's fill. You can animate changes between solid colors, gradients, even images. So in this case, both the actual shape of these different objects are changing, but so is the fill. So you see that this bar goes from bottom here to top here, and then all of it's changing from blue to green. And you're gonna see these in-between colors of like teals and turquoises that it's kind of automatically cycling through to get you to the two colors. Awesome. Any questions with Smart Animate there? Awesome. So I'm going to do some kind of ad hoc, really quick demos. You're welcome to open up a file and kind of follow along if you'd like. It's not necessarily this exact demo we're going to do here. So I'm just going to make this Smart Animate demo really quick. So let's start by making two identical frames. I'm actually just going to go ahead and make them presentation sized. So we're going to have this frame, and then we're going to move it to a second frame afterwards. So let's start by just making a circle that's going to move in size and location and color. So the circle is going to start up really big here. I can have it be like this. I can change it to any color I want. And then let's have it move from here to this corner, to this corner, to this corner, and back. So we want it to hit all four of those corners. Do something different in all of them. So when it's going to move here, let's have it go here. And then let's also make sure they're all named the same thing. So I'll do this and I'll kind of intentionally show you what it looks like to break it. So let's name this ball. Let's name this also ball. And let's make this one a lot smaller. Let's make it 30% opacity, and let's make it green. For the next one, let's actually go ahead and make it no longer actually this shape. In fact, let's go in and mess with the vector. This should still work. I'm gonna pull it out to be this weird shape. I'm gonna grab this to be a different color. I'm gonna make it 100% and make it purple. These are real ugly colors I'm choosing today, sorry. And then let's bring this here again. And let's have it actually just rotate. Let's have it rotate 90 degrees, go to this corner, and then become pink. Yeah, so these are not the most awesome colors ever, but this should still work. So now when I want to prototype something, fun fact, there's now a shortcut to go into prototype mode, which I'm really excited about. It's Shift-E. You didn't used to be able to do this. So you press Shift-E, you're gonna be able to switch between the design and the prototype panels really easily without having to like move your mouse all the way up and back over. Okay. You're gonna get a lot of tooltips like this because of the new features. So let's go ahead and prototype this. Let's have this go to the next frame. I want it to be, let's just say on click, let's just have a little bit more control over it. Let's smart animate it. And this is going to show you that time delay. So this 300 millisecond is the default. It's like a good amount of time. It's a third of a second. But if I was to make this like 1.5 seconds, you see the animation itself is going to delay as well. So you see that the animation itself gets a lot slower. If I make it 100 milliseconds, it gets a lot faster. So that's just a handy thing to have as a reference. And this idea of easing in and out is in line with what we talked about with the animation. So we'll go more into that later, I believe. But yeah, just really basic smart animate right now. On click for all of these, and we'll see how it looks. Okay, praying that I taught you this right and that I didn't do anything wrong. So on this first click, see that it is able, let's actually slow these down. It's hitting this kind of like ugly brown in the middle because it's moving from red to green. But it is doing basically what I want it to do. So let's grab all of these. And oh wait, what I just did also, because all of these interactions I did have the same details, namely they're all smart animate on click 300 milliseconds, I can select everything with Control A and actually just change all of them at the same time. So that's very convenient. Now they should all be slower. So when I click, it's gonna hit this ugly brown and then be in the middle right here. Right there, you saw it go do that. This should stretch out the ball and change the color. Oh no, it didn't do that, okay. I lied. We will talk about that in a second then. This is also going to turn. So that did work, this idea of it rotating. It rotates quite nicely. And it's going back up, and it is breaking. Okay, so clearly I don't know everything that I'm talking about, but if you break a shape or vector, it's not gonna be able to naturally change the shape of it. This is coming back to me where I've tried that before and thought it would work, it doesn't. So it does need to only be in scale. Changing the shape of it isn't necessarily going to work. I do think rectangles break that. Rectangles are able to change. So let's actually just try that. Rectangle 1, let's call it box. And then if I copy it over and make it small, I believe rectangles should work. Yeah, rectangles are the kind of the case because it is a sense of scaling where you're just squashing it as opposed to it being a fully new shape. But yeah, I've kind of ruined that now. Apologies. Let's actually just go ahead and replace these then. Let's make this quite large. But yeah, are y'all getting the basic gist of how Smart Animate basically works? Any questions here with this example? Cool. So this is a pretty like silly example. Obviously, you're not going to have an app that just does this, unless you do, which more power to you. But this is not necessarily a normal use case of Smart Animate, so hopefully we'll quickly be talking about cases where it makes a lot more sense. So now we've got this weird pill shape that just bounces around our screen very easily, very nicely, changing onto all of these pretty ugly colors in between, but it is smooth, and that's kind of the important part about it. Awesome. So going into advanced prototyping now. I think after this we'll take a quick break, but advanced prototyping is about putting transitions and Smart Animate together to make things that are basically looking the way that you want them to. So transitions, like we talked about, are the idea of these animations So smart animate is a type of transition, and when we connect two frames to make an interaction, we can specify to use smart animate. So in this case, I just want to quickly call out, what is this going to look like when it's prototyped? Just quickly describe it. Yeah, it's going to get smaller. It's going to really nicely shrink very easily. So, okay, well, I just did this, but how does smart animate? Just open the prototype tab with Shift E, or by clicking on it, you connect two frames to make an interaction, and then in the interaction, the animation specifically, you want to select smart animate. You can apply any kind of easing to the transition or change the duration if you want. Easing is, again, the idea of this curve, and then you can repeat this for any other frames you want to smart animate. So when you want to combine transitions with smart animate, where in certain cases you don't want the entire screen to smart animate, it'll pop up this option to smart animate anything that is applicable. So any matching layers that exist. So in this case, layers that do not match, it'll use the transition you selected, so it'll push it out of the frame. But layers that do match will be smart animated. So this is helpful for certain cases where you do need that kind of full screen interaction, but you don't want the screen to suddenly change shape. You just want the items, for example, the colors to move nicely and that sort of thing. So since Figma matches layers when using smart animate, it's important to keep track of the layer names that you have between transitioning frames. Otherwise, the results might not be necessarily what you expect. Like in this case, you see that on Explorer 1, this is called the status bar and the navigation. And on Explorer 2, it's also called status bar and navigation, because it is really critical that they have the same naming when you do something like animating between the home icon being lit up and this icon being lit up, this compass icon being lit up. So in the case that even if the background is dissolving, or if the background is even kind of pushing the frame, I don't want this whole navigation bar to also move. So you can think of something like on the Android, there's a status bar at the bottom that has the home, back, and recents buttons. Those never move when you're changing between apps, even if you click on them, even if you interact with the screen. So you would use smart animate to make sure that they all stay where they need to stay. They're all going to not actually be pushed off the screen when you have a push transition. Yeah, so smart animate you can think of as a way to keep elements on your screen when you need them to stay on your screen. So when you preview this transition, you see how content moves from one frame to the next really easily. And you see that this bar is changing, but it's not being pushed. Everything else is being pushed off of the screen. I guess this is backwards. It's being pushed off of the screen, but this particular bar, the whole card, isn't moving left to right. Otherwise, you'd see this home and these icons all get pushed here to the left. But here you see that it's sticky, and it's smart animated by moving the focus icon. Yeah. Don't worry about how this transition doesn't really make sense. This is not a fully prototyped product, but just note that smart animate is what's keeping this here statically. Also, this top bar here, in the case of Figma, when it's not actually your phone, you have to add these kind of things as well to make sure it feels real. So this is also something that's smart animated to keep in place. So yeah, with that, we're gonna do this animation demo of this particular set of screens. This is in the file. If you have the lecture file downloaded, and we'll be going through what exactly you need to do in order to get to these. So we'll go into the demo file. All of the contents, all the components are right here, and they should work fine. But yeah, we'll go ahead and start doing this. So the basics that I want to do here are, first, we can identify what Myles was going for when he made this particular slides. So I was making sure he didn't put a GIF. In this case, we want clicking the bookmark to bring you to this page. So we can go ahead and add that prototype. Oh, this is already done. Okay, let's make another copy. If you're on the file right now and it's already completed and you want to follow along, you can make a copy, and then you can right-click and say remove interactions. It's going to delete everything really easily. That's all you need to do, just right-click and remove interactions. So when we're going through this, we want to have this button, this vector, go into the bookmark screen, so we can just drag it out from here. And then we want to make sure that it's smart animated. Let's see what kind of transition that Myles used here. Myles used push, so let me show you what it'll look like if you don't actually have smart animate on. So push, if we don't smart animate matching layers, we can go into this view and see that the bar is going to move. So here, the whole bar is moving. That is ugly. Your app does not want that to happen. You do not want the whole thing to move with you. So when I turn on smart animate there, it's not going to do that. Sorry, I know it feels like I'm beating a dead horse here, but this is a really hard concept for me to grasp. So yeah, the bar stays there below. It's static because it's being smart animated. Cool. You'll notice also that some things up here that you might like want it to be text done more nicely, it's going to kind of change here. So if we don't want these to fade, if we actually do want the text to also be pushed when we click it, one thing that we can do is change the naming of these groups. So because all of these are called header, they're all going to dissolve. But if I change this to be just like, key smash, and I make sure to change all of the inside layers as well, if I do this, it should actually push as well. Yeah, so you see now that the text is getting pushed instead of getting dissolved because they have different layer names. So in this case, I actually think I like that better, so I'm going to keep it. But it's kind of a case where you might need to do that. You'll also notice that this here is dissolving. In the case where Smart Animate is being applied to objects that do have matching names but have different content, it's going to do that dissolve action. So it'll do its best to kind of preserve it as closely as possible, but it can't actually apply all of the individual in-betweens. So this is a case where you can see that this is called vector, and this is also called vector. That's not good naming. You should name them both icon or something else. But if I change this to be location icon, and I change this to be bookmark icon, then they're not going to do that. They're going to get pushed. So push out of the way. So we'll leave that for the sake of this demo, but you might not always want that. So in this case, I'm also going to go ahead and bring this over. And notice that Figma is actually pretty clever with this, where it knows because you went backwards that you want it to be pushed to the left. So I do actually want that. In this case, we saw that going here. Oh, sorry, it's backwards. It's going to automatically push to the left. But this case, we do actually want it to push to the right because we need this to move naturally when we go from the right to the left. Yeah, so it's going to bring me back. If we left it as being pushed to the left, it's going to instead just have this weird endless cycle carousel thing going on. So do make sure that you're mindful of those directions. We could also have it obviously go from the top or the bottom if we really wanted to be super chaotic here. Nothing is stopping us from doing this UI pattern. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So this is a case where if you think about yourself as a user, this movement, this makes sense. This is really jarring. So you want it to think about kind of the actual spatial awareness here, where when you swipe with this kind of faux movement, you're almost making this mental map of the app in the user's mind. So you kind of imagine that physically the home is to the left of the locations, is to the left of the bookmarks, is to the left of the profile. So you want to make sure that things like pushing and moving and sliding all make sense with that mental model that the person created, like a dungeon map or something, of the app itself. So you want to make sure you're not having things randomly pop up. Cool. So next we have this interaction of kind of dragging this card. You can see here that they said on drag, you want to navigate to the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. On drag, navigate to the screen. And we want it to be, on drag. And then this should just be smart animating because we don't want everything to push. If it does push, we'll show you. Again, you can kind of expect what's going to happen. Everything is going to get pushed that's not smart animated nicely. So it's going to like push all of those objects around. This weird trash can just kind of appears. So we don't like that. We want everything to smart animate. So smart animate all the layers. And now everything is just static. Everything stays in place because it knows that it's all the same. Something to note is here, if you look really closely, you see that the word bookmarks is kind of flashing and the vector is kind of flashing. This is because I renamed the names of these in this layer. So here I named these to key smashes and I named this to be bookmark icon, but here it's called header and here it's called vector. So what it's doing is dissolving between the two identical looking items and it's causing that little flash. So if you do see this little flash, it means that probably the same thing has happened to you where you've renamed one version, but not the rest of them. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, now we've got click and then drag. And then we want it to click and then everything is going to come back up because you're deleting that bookmark. So in this case, let's see what he's done here. Oh, what? This is a strange set of interactions. So Let's actually play with this also. Sorry, this was made quite a while ago and I'm not entirely sure of what Myles was intending here. Okay, so in this case, the swipe interaction is actually just going to delete it. It's not a second click. Apologies for that. So here, I'm holding and dragging, so it hasn't let go yet. But when I let go, and my mouse leaves that section, it's gonna remove it. So this is not necessarily a perfect animation, but you want it to basically say mouse up when you let go of the mouse click, and you finish the drag. It's going to have it go away. Oh, have it go away. So one more time. It's gonna go away. You can undo it and bring it back. You can go away, undo and bring it back. So we'll go ahead and alter this to say on drag you do bring it here. But in this case, I think what we can do is say that instead of on click, on mouse up meaning when you let go, mouse down meaning when you click. On mouse up, when I let go of the mouse, it's going to bring me here. So that is going to be smart animated. So we'll see how that happens. Yep. So, oh wait, this is the flow we want. Here we go. Click. Okay, seems like that does not work. I am so sorry. So instead of mouse up in this case, we'll just have it be mouse leave, and that's gonna work. So when I click here, and let go, and then when the mouse leaves, it exits that kind of space, it's gonna go away. So this is not super accurate necessarily because I'm doing a mobile app interaction on a computer, where when you're actually doing this with your fingers, there's a different kind of sensation, a different kind of thing to be cautious of. So this is the best estimation we can have right now. I'm also going to speed up these animations really quickly. Instead of 1,000 milliseconds, we'll just do 300, and we'll do 300 here. And then this can be a little bit slower. You can make this maybe 500, and then this will be 500 as well. Cool. And from there, we want to also be able to undo and bring you all the way back to this version, which will also have it be smart animated. So what it ideally will do is bring this all the way down and bring those back. When I click undo, it brings that back. It has the one that currently exists move all the way back down. So yeah, that is this app interaction. It's doing all the things we needed to do right now. And one thing to note is that on the screen, I haven't yet prototyped this button. So in this case, if I did want to have all of these menu buttons animated all the time, I'd have to manually go in and do all of them. But you can actually connect interactions to different components. So if I were to copy paste this screen, it should make a copy of the interactions that are on here. So that's really convenient. So what might have happened in this case is Myles would have done the screen and then made a copy and had all of these automatically go with them. So in this case, let me just really quickly do this, and I want it again to be push. I want it to be, I think that's right, not right. But I want them all to bring me back. My goodness. Okay, that is the wrong direction. So again, apologies for me also like not being the most brushed up on this. I want to say I'm not the best prototyper in the decal staff. And you're going to see that different people have different strengths on different things. So I hope that this is still helpful, kind of walking through all of these different changes and seeing how to make this app prototype. So yeah, any questions with that demo? Cool. Let's take a quick break. I'm going to make it a little bit shorter just because I'm still scared they're going to cut us off at 8:15. So we'll regroup in 3 minutes at 7:57.
use it first.
I didn't know that.
It'll be
Wait, is
definitely
the
first.
I found the bumper. I had no idea.
It's just popular.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it'll be Alright, today we're learning Illustrator. How about you have Aaron teach?
I'll teach the rest of the
You
class.
just taught a hex workshop, so you can teach the rest of this class.
Yeah. Anyone else want to teach?
We're pivoting from Figma to Domingo.
Actually, I want all of you all to start thinking about becoming TAs. Please join the first step. They join the first step from being TAs. Please join.
I know.
We need you.
You said no. No, it sounds fun because I don't know how to use Illustrator, so you said I don't want to.
It is fun and also relatively.
Wait, whose team are you on?
Erica and Ryan.
They haven't taught you Illustrator?
Wait,
No time to
I
argue
do all
now.
my backyard in Figma, so.
Okay, we're back.
Better.
It is 7:57, so we're gonna go ahead and finish up this lecture. And if we have time, I would love to share some interactive component things with y'all. But yeah, let's settle down and get started again. Cool. So renaming layers. No more layer 27s if you've been having that. Also, are the screen's like really messed up right now? Is it just really bad at detecting green? That is so weird. Okay. It's just, okay, great, awesome. Okay, so we talked about this before. We're gonna keep drilling this into your heads where you, yep. Oh, what's the question?
Any tips on when to use smart animate or prototype versus interactive components for small interactions? For example, when dragging the gather image without switching the screen, could that have been done for an interactive component? Getting a bit confused with the best use cases for those two things.
Yeah, so question is about when to use smart animate versus when to use interactive components. I'm gonna be honest, I have not gotten to explore interactive components a lot due to the fact that it came out today. I used it a little bit when it was in beta. I'm gonna say, in a case where you can be using interactive components and it's self-encapsulated, by which I mean the components themselves are the only things changing, I would use smart components. If it's a case where toggling something changes the screen at large, like in that case here, where dragging the image changed the full screen, I would say to make that not a smart animate, or not an interactive component thing, and to use smart animate instead. Also, you can use smart animate in interactive components. I'm also just gonna be saying this under the assumption that whoever asked the question is a little bit familiar with interactive components. But yeah, within interactive components, I'd say it's for things like a checkbox, where toggling it on and off is just gonna switch between the two components. Like a hover state on a button, maybe something like toggles, something like, kind of those small pieces of UI that are pretty self-contained, maybe even like a loading spinner. But anytime that the component leads to a larger scale change, like if a button that says continue brings you to a new screen, I would not rely purely on interactive components because it's not going to be able to do that. It means that if you have a single button interactive component that goes to another screen, every time you click any instance of that button, it's going to bring you to that screen again. So this would be good for like a home button, navigation buttons, but not necessarily something like a continue button. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Basically only use interactive components for interactions that are never changing across the whole app. So if they're always going to go to the same thing, if they're always going to cause the same action, use interactive components. But yeah, cool. Let me know if that answers the question or not. But yeah. So layer matching. Before Smart Animate, Figma itself as a product didn't necessarily place a ton of importance on making good layer naming. It's just a good habit to have. But because Smart Animate and layer naming, Smart Animate relies on layer naming and hierarchy, it requires you to pay attention to the layer names. But there is a really easy way to rename your layers. that Myles lost his mind about when I told him about it because there's no way to easily access it. But there is this nice modal that shows up if you have multiple objects selected and then you rename them. So you can view and update layer names by clicking on them in the left sidebar, but also if you want to rename a lot at once, you can use Control or Command R to open up this modal that renames every layer to be like the same name. You can add numbers, you can add suffixes, and all that good stuff. I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. This is exactly what we do to rename all of our 2,000 slides on all of our decks. So in this case, when I want to name all of these like recap and then the slide number, I select all 5, I press Command R, and it brings up this nice little page. So in this case, I can have them all be named recap, and then like period, number. And I can change these. It says $NN. If I change it to $1N, it removes the zeros. If I add a bunch of N's, it's going to add a bunch of zeros. So that's nice and customizable. I can actually also have it say, like, if I wanted all of these to have the word old at the beginning, and then the current name that is named right now, I can have it, I can have it repeat or something over and over if I really wanted to. Another case is that if I don't want these to say R, I can have it matched rename. So R is going to become Key Smash. It'll rename it for all of those, and then basically do anything that you need. But the TLDR is that this is a really, really helpful modal, and I would highly recommend you check it out. Really good for batch renaming anytime you have something that you need to just, like you have a lot of things that are called circle, and you need them all to be named circle and then a number after it. Really easy. Cool. With that, there's also a way to view matching layers, so you can see what layers or objects exist in different parts of your file. When you're in the prototype panel, when you hover over something, Figma will actually highlight all the other layers that it exists in, even if they're off screen. So in this case, when I hover over this nav bar, all of the nav bars have a really light hover on them. So if I were to say, like, make a copy of this one and move it to be under the screen, it'll still tell me, like, hey, there's something down there, I think. If I moved it, like, up here, it should, wait, what the crap? What is it with things today that actually break whenever I'm using them? But basically the idea is that it'll hover on any case that it appears throughout the file. So even if they aren't necessarily here. So like this is hovering both of the navs. This is hovering on all 6 of the Berkeley Social Club icons. This is hovering on all of the ones that are named the same way. Notice here that when we renamed this bookmarks on the bottom, it's no longer attached to the rest of them that are named header. Awesome. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit really quickly about animation in UX, but any questions about good layer naming practices besides just numbers? I'm actually going to jump in with one more tip. If you have a lot of different things, I find it really helpful to use slash naming just to kind of differentiate between different things. So in this case, I would actually probably name these screens in a pretty specific way. So here, I would call this maybe destinations home. I would call this bookmarks all cards. I would call this bookmarks gather swipe. I'd call this bookmarks maybe 2 cards. So I'd go back and rename this to match. So I'd say 3 cards. And in this case, let's say this should actually more properly be named bookmarks 3 cards swipe. So because I have all of these different slashes, the convenient thing about it is whenever I need to do an interaction ad here, if I have this say on click navigate to and I have to pick from this drop down, it makes a little bit more sense what each of the frames are based on the naming scheme of it. So do actually just try to do good frame naming schemes, usually with this slash that kind of talks about the directory where it exists in the app in order to make sure that things are cohesive. Cool. So animations in UX basically function a little differently how you might think of animations in like a cartoon, an animation movie or video, where the most important thing here is usability and functionality, not entertainment. So you've probably seen apps that have really like fun and delightful animations. You can think of different apps. I'm trying to think of some. If anyone can think of one, shout it out. That have like really cute loading screens or something that is really engaging. But for the most part, there's a lot of subtle animations in UI that you don't really notice and are important to make something feel usable and make it feel real. So functional animation establishes well-thought hierarchy and relationships between different groups of information. So you can think about something like this easing curve where it's kind of fast, slow, slow, fast. It's that sense of natural movement that we've talked about before. When you have this obscuration, you see that the background item is a little bit blurry. It might be hard to tell here, but it gives you a sense of importance on the top layer as opposed to what it's hiding. This parenting one has these two objects that are clearly attached to each other, but it kind of keeps them close, but changes the sizing to kind of indicate what your focus should move towards. So instead of focusing on the bottom, you start looking at the top item. Dimensionality, I suspect this is not as popular now, but it's a big thing. I think in the past, if you think like classic Word, of the sense of faking 3D-ness in your apps or in your products, makes it feel like easier to use almost, because if you're moving from physical paper into an application on your computer, you want it to feel like it's three-dimensional and you want it to feel like it's real. So the sense of dimensionality I think used to be really popular, but is less so now. But I will say you probably see this a lot in games, giving a sense of like depth in your screen. Parallax scrolling, I hate it. I hate parallax scrolling. Sorry. That's just like one thing where when you scroll, two things move at different rates of speed. A lot of websites do it. I freaking hate it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I just hate it. Anyways, so animation needs to feel natural, similar to how we model or animate objects. So to a certain extent, animations basically follow the rules of physics. You don't really it's not gonna feel natural if it's not following the rules of physics that you see in your everyday life. Like, if I dropped this pen and it went straight down in a straight line, that would be super uncomfortable, which means that if I had something in an animation that I dropped or a character dropped, it also can't just move like that. That would be weird and messed up. So in this case of this ball easing curve, you can see that they've visualized it as slow, fast, slow. So the basic physics or like the math part of this is the idea of the flatter it is, the slower it is, and the steeper it is, the faster it is. So it goes from flat, slow, to steep, fast, to flat, slow. And in fact, it's bringing this down a little bit so the object moves. It's like, it has some resistance to it. So it's like popping backwards and forwards and then backwards and forwards. Almost like you're pulling and releasing one of those toy cars. Like it has a little bit of a wind up before it goes in. So that's something that you can actually play with as well through the use of custom easing curves. So in the first case, context is really important. So you have these two cases where the scrolling feels a little bit different. So this one, so in this case, there's new posts being added with no animation. So if you watch this loop, new post, new post, new post, it's just pushing them all down with zero animation. But if we want to give this sense of like real-time information, the sense of like, hey, an action has been performed, somebody did something, maybe even saying like, we want to give you that sense of like movement and that sense of like urgency that, hey, news is coming in. There are new tweets for you to look at. There are new posts for you to observe. I have this sense of movement by adding all of these different icons or all these different cards and making them appear from the top like they're being spat out from the very top. So I think you can see this with Twitter and Instagram, where even if you click the top part that says refresh for new posts, it still animates them coming down, even though like you've already clicked like, hey, I want the new posts now. It still gives you that sense of, hey, they're appearing because they physically are like cards, they're physically like a tweet that you could hold in your hands and they're being physically pushed towards you. So another thing I don't know if it's gonna be here. It's not here. But a good example is when you pull something down to refresh the page. That's something that has like a feeling of resistance where when you pull, the page doesn't fully come with you. It only goes down a little bit. Like there's a maximum that it's going to be allowed to move. And that sense of resistance is like you're pulling and releasing something like a rubber band, like a spring. And that sense of like springiness makes things feel really good to use because they almost feel more real. So case 2, a good and subtle animation is nice and helpful. So we can see in this good version, the animation is just going up and not necessarily bouncing. So you see here, sorry, I'm gonna show it here. This is gonna bounce up and down. So this top part, when it pulls up, bounces up and down. Yeah, so you can see it like kind of do this recoil. In this case, it is not recoiling, it just moves right up there, which is helpful. And then the cards themselves are coming in from all sides, where in this case, the cards are all coming in from the bottom. So if you open an app and all the information just flew in all directions, that would definitely be jarring. If that's what you're going for, do it. I love websites that look crazy and just like break all of the rules. I think they're really fun. But if you're trying to get the most users on your app, you probably don't want that. It makes the most sense here, like I talked about, that physicality of everything to come in from the bottom, especially if they continue to come in from the bottom as you're scrolling. So a good animation in a lot of apps and a lot of kind of use cases here are things that the user don't even notice. It needs to be intuitive. So we've talked about, how to make an intuitive design, how to be thinking with empathy about the user. The same idea goes towards the really minute interactions of just an animation. What is intuitive? What is the user expecting it to do when they open up the app? And that idea of expectation is also affected by the apps we've used in the past. So you could even think about how apps in different cultures might have different kinds of loading screens. They might have different kinds of animations that people are accustomed to. If you're making an app that is going to be sold in like Mexico, maybe people are comfortable with different things. So you need to be sure that you know kind of what is on the market, what is popular, what is somebody going in with information about when you actually create an app, even down to these animations. All right, case 3. Orientation, you can think of your screens like taking up 2D space. So this is what I talked about before, of like when you bring something and you go back, it needs to physically go back to where it came from. So here, you can see that when you click, the card is gonna come up from the bottom and then leave on the left. So you click, card's coming up from the bottom, and it leaves on the left. So you've kind of swept it up from mysterious location. I've pulled it up from here and then I'm pushing it over here, and I don't know where it's gone. I don't know what's gonna happen next time I click on it, but in this good case, pushing it is gonna bring things over from the right and then push them back out to the right. And it's also adding this element of this particular thing is smart animated. This alien screen and the name are gonna move in to kind of connect me and ground me to the previous page to know that when I click it or when I go back, I'm going back to where I came from. Like it has this actual motion of receding back into the original spot. So spatial navigation, you can even just play with this and draw out or move your whole app to be orientated where you like physically would put them. And it should make sense. There really shouldn't be a lot of like double layering or one thing goes from here and then moves over here. This is a really helpful rule of thumb to think about what kind of animation you want to use. Yeah, animation should also, I wouldn't say always have to be, but it's nice to think about it during the prototyping process, and prototyping as in like wireframing. In those sketch phases, if it is something that's really important, it is nice to think about how an animation might function, how you're gonna get from screen 1 to screen 2. And a lot of time you're implicitly thinking about that when you make something like a navigation bar, when you make something like a modal or a pop-up, you're already thinking about how things work spatially. So understanding how information flows and transitions is important as a factor to UX and content-driven design. My computer's about to die, so I'm going to plug it in while I talk, but we'll also go ahead and do wrap up. Deepest apologies. This week we are going back to having homework as well. So we had homework last week with the auto layout tools. So this week we're going to be doing a lot of practice with Smart Animate. So sorry if y'all didn't hear that. We have homework this week. Homework 8 is a Smart Animate Pokédex. So we're making a kind of faux Pokédex app and allowing you to kind of basically follow the descriptions of an animation that somebody else has outlined and then apply those animations however you best see fit. So Myles has written these really detailed pieces of text that tell you, what should be happening when you click on something, and it's up to you to figure out what is the trigger, what is the action, and what is the animation. And then in this case, you might also have to make new frames that actually reflect those changes based on kind of the base frames that are given to you. Lab 8 is the same idea. It's another example using a smart home app. So this is going to be just more practice with Smart Animate. We wanted to kind of drill these ideas down, make sure that you're comfortable making those decisions and trusting your gut when it comes to deciding what animations to use and what interactions to use. So practice by using Smart Animate on a smart home app. Very clever and funny. It's also 8:15. I am praying that these don't turn off. And the secret word for today is going to be Bulbasaur. B-U-L-B-A-S-A-U-R. Bulbasaur. B-U-L-B-A-S-A-U-R. Awesome. So, announcements. I'm just going to hope it hits 8:16. Again, the homework. Sorry, this says. Okay. It's fine. It's fine. I emailed them and they said it'll be fixed eventually. So, homework 8. Smart Anime Pokédex. There's readings as well this week. I'm sorry, the announcement says 7. And then also interactive components. I did not get to play with them. I explained a question in the middle of class that if it didn't make any sense to you, that's totally fine. I assume that there are some playground files that you can mess with. So one thing that I want to make really clear is that we are not going to require that you use interactive components on the homework or the lab or the final if you do choose to do prototyping on the final. But we highly recommend that you look into it. I think as it becomes a common feature, it will be basically expected that you are able to interact with it or able to know how to use it. So an example of kind of visualizing how helpful it is, if you have a screen that has 3 checkboxes, you would normally have to prototype every single screen with checkbox A, but not B, C, checkbox A, B, but not C, checkbox A, B, C, and then checkbox B, but not A, C. You get the idea of every single combination has to be its own screen. With interactive components, it can be a single screen because what's gonna happen is the checkmark component has a checked and an unchecked version that is triggered on click. So if you click off checkbox, it becomes on, and you click on checkbox, it becomes off. You can have a single screen with 3 of those components, and that's all you need. So it's basically a lot easier. So I would definitely take a look into that, practice with it. There's a lot of crazy community files. There's somebody who made a matrix animation with the numbers behind him flashing using interactive components because it was just really easy to put this together. But yeah, they came out today. Take a look at the release notes, take a look at the updates. When you open a file, it should spit out some information at you. So take a look at that and come to office hours if you want to talk about it. I'll be practicing with those this week to get more comfortable with it. I'm happy to help answer any questions or learn with you together. Again, just as another reminder, you do not have to be perfect at everything in Figma. I am clearly not perfect at prototyping, and it's something that I'm actively always learning. So don't be afraid to come to office hours or ask questions in Slack if you ever need help with anything. Our staff will do their best. So that's all. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm hoping and praying this gets fixed because next week is the illustration lecture, which is my favorite lecture because I wrote it, and I kind of dive really deep into elements of illustration if you're not familiar with it already, and then talking more about how to use the pen tool. So yeah, see you next week. Thank you so much. Thank you.